Good evening, and thank you for tuning in to our ongoing series, An Evening With. I'm Jonathan Dewar, Director General and Vice President of Collections, Research, Exhibitions, and Repatriation at the Canadian Museum of History. We're very excited to present An Evening With Nerene Virgin and Anthony Sherwood tonight. Before we proceed, I would like to acknowledge that the museum is located on the traditional, unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. Acknowledging where we are is key to our ongoing relationship with Indigenous communities across Canada. Many of you are joining us from various parts of the country, and I encourage you to also take a moment to acknowledge the traditional stewards of the territories on which you reside. Part of our mandate involves collecting, studying, and sharing the many histories that have helped shape and continue to shape our national story. We strive to include and honor diverse perspectives, and this evening reflects that vital engagement. Launched in 2019, the series An Evening With has offered inspiring conversations with some of Canada's most interesting and influential leaders in sports, politics, the arts, history, and media. Tonight, we are so pleased to have with us two premier figures from Canadian film and television. But they are much more than performers or even creators. Both are activists who continue to challenge and change the status quo within their industries. Anthony Sherwood is a talented actor whose face you will likely recognize from countless films and television programs. However, he's just as adept behind the camera, directing and producing award-winning documentaries. When it comes to the Black Canadian experience, he is an expert at informing, explaining, illuminating, and challenging, sometimes through his films, but often through his lobbying and advisory roles. Nerene Virgin will be no stranger to you either. Long the face of various news and talk shows, she is also an accomplished actor, appearing on screens both large and small. She has championed a Black history curriculum in schools, promoted anti-racism programs for children, and written and produced numerous biographies of Black Canadians. Reflecting her influence on a generation of Canadian children, the Canadian Museum of History's special exhibition, From Pepinot to PAW Patrol, Television of Our Childhoods, includes material from the TV Ontario program Today's Special, in which she played Jody. Museums have a responsibility to encourage dialogue, to amplify diverse voices and perspectives, and to challenge the inequalities that exist in Canada. I look forward to tonight's discussion and to the important perspectives we are sure to gain from it. Thanks to all of you for joining us for what promises to be an engaging and wide-ranging conversation. Our thanks as well to series sponsor TD Bank Group. I would now like to introduce tonight's moderator, CBC senior reporter and parliamentary correspondent, David Thurton.
Hello everyone, I'm David Thurton. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. This discussion has been a long time in coming, and before we just jump right into the questions, because that's what we're going to do, just a bit of housekeeping. We want to hear your questions, and oftentimes those are the better ones. So please click the raise hand function on Zoom. I'm told it's there. You can click on that, and that will let the moderator, the virtual moderator, know that you want to ask a question. So let's just jump right in. Nerene, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay.
This year marks 3 years since the murder of George Floyd. That was an event that shook the world, that certainly shook North America. It's been described as this racial reckoning that we've all been through. I'm wondering for yourself, can you point to another event in your lifetime, in history, that had that kind of, that shook things up, that made people aware that systemic racism exists, racism is a part of our society, and we needed to do something about that? I mean, I don't know. Is there an event that you could point to that yeah?
A single event.
Yeah.
I know that there have been occasions police shootings of young black men that have raised the ire and raised the attention of many of us across the country. As far as a single event, I don't have one that comes to mind.
That I don't know if it had that impact on you, but as a journalist working in Ottawa here, I can't think, I mean, I'm not as wise and as experienced as you all, I can't think of an event that changed the conversation, that made people aware. We didn't have to explain things as black people. We didn't have to explain racism anymore. People just seemed to get it. I don't know if that was the experience either with you, Nerene, as you were going through that, as we mark this 3rd anniversary. I know it's a weird way to begin this discussion, but you know, it's an important time marker in our society, and I just thought we should acknowledge that. So I don't know, yeah.
It's certainly an event that rippled through Canadian society, and certainly drew attention to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And there has certainly been, since that time, companies, organizations, everyone getting on board.
Yes.
You know, you go to pretty well any organization or company's front page on their website, and there'll be a reference to how committed they are to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So the killing of George Floyd certainly rippled through our country as well. Demonstrations, protests, people were out in the streets. Yeah, it raised a level of consciousness.
Okay. Anthony, let's bring you into this. How about you? Can you point to an event that kind of had that?
There was a moment in my personal life that shook me and then snowballed and affected other people. In the early 1970s or the mid 1970s, when I decided to become an actor, it was a time before the Canadian film industry was established, and there was a very small production of Canadian television. So how Canadian actors, most Canadian actors, made a living was through television commercials. And the first television commercial that I went to audition for, the casting director looked at me and said, "We're sorry, but the advertiser does not want any blacks in their commercial." And I said, "What?" And it shook me so hard that I turned around and formed a committee, an association of black performers in Montreal at the time, that pressured the television industry, the advertising industry, to start including visible minorities in their television commercials. And what had happened is that eventually advertisers started to include us in their advertising, not because of the goodwill, because they realized that the face of Canada was changing and they were missing out on a huge consumer market. And today, when you look at television commercials and you see all kinds of people from all different persuasions doing commercials, I like to think that our little organization in Montreal really started the ball rolling here in Canada about changing attitudes. And that's what sometimes it takes, is for someone to stand up and take a stand against the establishment. I was blacklisted for 2 years in the industry and couldn't get a job for 2 years because of my activism. But I wanted things to change. So that moment struck me personally in my life. And I realized that it was not only me that was being affected, but also my comrades who looked like me were being affected by it.
Okay.
I think that if we move from the broader perspective to more of a personal experience, I too have a personal experience that changed myself and changed the environment in which I operate. In 2007, I ran for provincial politics, and there was a reporter in the Hamilton area who, week after week, in all of the regional papers, I think there were 7 of them, wrote derogatory articles about me, suggesting that I wasn't qualified, who does she think she is, with headlines. His headlines would be things like, the party had found their Today Special, which is a reference to the show that I co-starred in. When I accepted the nomination for the party, his headline for that nomination meeting was a virgin's love-in, which was objectifying and sexualizing. And he did this week after week after week. I lost that election by something like 500 votes. I ended up, he worked for Metroland Media, which is a subsidiary of the Toronto Star. I sued, and I was told by the political party to let it go. Let it go. We need the media on our side. If you sue, we will never support you to run for election again. But I went ahead, and Charles Roach, who was quite an activist lawyer, and his daughter Kike Roach represented me. They eventually sued. It took 5 years. They eventually settled with me. I'm pleased because what happened in Hamilton, there had not been a black representative in Parliament elected since Lincoln Alexander. Mm-hmm. But the next person who ran, Matthew Green, did not have to endure what I had to endure. And so it made a change, and it's made a change moving forward.
I love listening to these stories and these moments in your life where you all have had the courage to stand up and to make the necessary changes that didn't just benefit yourself, but Matthew Green, who is a member of Parliament that I speak frequently to, and the situation that paved the way for other actors of color that you just mentioned, Anthony. So
I should mention that the headline that finally did them in was when he said, his headline was, "Into the Briar Patch Again," and said the political party had found their favorite tar baby, and that I was only being given an opportunity to run because they didn't want to run a, quote, bland white male. Wow. That was the article that led to the lawsuit.
And this was 2007?
This was 2007, and I sued them for libel.
So, I mean, this is probably a question we end on, but let's just kind of throw it out there. Have things changed, do you think, in your industries, in politics, in journalism, in the media? Do you think things have changed for Black Canadians? Is it easier? Are we being better represented? Are we being represented in the right ways?
In my industry, the film and television, it has changed immensely. Mm-hmm. When I first started working as an actor on a film set, I would be the only visible minority on set. Today, you have visible minority makeup artist, hairdresser, second assistant director, cameraman. Still times have changed. And there's special initiatives for using BIPOC artists for film industries. Film productions get credit for using more people of color. And so there is an incentive to include us. And I see the film and TV industry has changed immensely from the time I started till now.
Mm-hmm. Nerene?
Yeah, I would agree with what Anthony has said. Yeah. It's gratifying for me to look at television now and to see the Tracy Moores and to see so many faces of different colors anchoring newscasts and working as reporters. People like yourself.
Yeah.
When I was When I was at CFTO hosting Eye on Toronto, I was told by my superiors that I needed to learn my place, and that even though I had really, really high ratings that they never expected. I think the only show that was higher in my time slot was Sesame Street, which of course it would be. I was told that don't think just because you have high ratings they will ever accept anybody like you thinking you have power or something. So it's changed. It's changed, and it's rewarding to see that.
Yeah, I can't imagine anyone making that comment in the newsroom today. Okay, we're going to take a step back. Thank you for indulging that question, but it's an important thing to remark and remember. We seem to be forgetting, but anyways, let's take a step back. We all come from some place, and that place and those people that surround us shape us and make us into the people that we are today. So I'm going to start with you, Anthony. Can you tell us, a bit about yourself, your background, and how that contributed to, yourself?
I stand on the shoulders of my ancestors. Mm-hmm. I'm a seventh generation African Canadian, born in Halifax. So was my mom. My grandmother was an incredible person. Social activist, a feminist, way ahead of her time. She was an accomplished musician and music teacher. And she taught her 5 daughters how to play musical instruments, and was very active in Halifax, which was a very racist city in the 30s and 40s. And growing up there was very difficult for them. But I look at what my grandmother did, her activism in the community and with her church, and instilling morals and instilling pride in her children and in her grandchildren. It, we can trace our family roots back to as early as the 1790s. We are descendants, my family is descendants of the black loyalists, who were black people who fought for the British during the War of Independence for the United States, the War of 1776. And when the British lost the war, the British promised these black soldiers land in Nova Scotia. And that's how far we can trace our family ancestry. And I stand on the shoulders of those people because they had to go through so much. And even people within our own industry, I mean, people look at Nerene and I and consider us pioneers, but there were people ahead of us in our industry who opened the doors for us. People like Phyllis Marshall, people like Eleanor Collins, who were some of the, who had the first musical variety programs on television by a black person. Both Phyllis and Eleanor Collins were amazing singers who hosted their own show on television. So I stand on their shoulders as well and thank them for opening the doors and learning from them of how to conduct yourself, how to prepare yourself professionally, how to show what you're worth, and to, because you have a whole community behind you that is looking at you and hoping that you succeed, and you don't want to let them down.
Nerene, I'll ask you the same question. Tell us about your background and how that influences the person that you are today. Yeah.
I have achieved because they achieved. My family has been traced back. My great uncle, John Christie Holland, was the first black in Canada to be named Distinguished Citizen of the Year of any major Canadian city. And as a result of that, a historian and author, Jessie L. Beattie, decided she wanted to know more about this man, and she wanted to know his story. Where did he come from? What did his father tell him? What is the ancestry? So she wrote a book about him called John Christie Holland, and traced my family back to my great-great-great-grandfather to Cabinda in Africa, where he was a free man who was kidnapped, taken into slavery. And through generation after generation of enduring, my great-grandfather, at the age of 15, on a plantation, a tobacco plantation in Maryland, decided, I don't want to have the same fate as my father. His father had been sold off to Tennessee, down the river, as they said. Yeah. So at the age of 15, he took it upon himself, all by himself, to make that journey northward, a freedom seeker for a better life, not just for himself, but for subsequent generations. And this was a man who was illiterate, couldn't read or couldn't write. He married and they had 13 children, 9 of them survived into adulthood. But he and his wife decided their children would be educated. And in one generation, from a man who could not read or write, finally in his 40s, he learned. He learned from a minister who said, come to my home and I'll help you. But in one generation, one of his sons was the first black to be named Citizen of the Year. That's John Christie Holland. His daughter, my grandmother Grace, was an elocutionist who would be taken all over Canada as a storyteller and to recite poetry. Another of his daughters, Kathleen, became one of the foremost pipe organ players in all of North America, commissioned by Adam Clayton Powell to play for his church services in Harlem. Another son, William, understudied for Paul Robeson on Broadway. So when I realize that blood is coursing through my veins, it's inspiring.
It's inspiring, and it inspired you to take
it inspires
the path
me
that you took.
Yes. Yeah. And to instill in my children the same feelings that have been instilled in me. I remember my grandparents saying to me, you are a Holland Tolliver and you will conduct yourself as such.
You are a what?
A Holland Tolliver.
Okay, a Holland.
That was the last names. And you must conduct yourself as such.
Okay.
See, I'm so jealous of Nerene knowing so much about her family background. Like I know, we go back 1790s, but we know very little. She has records that go way back. And to know what part of Africa your ancestors come from, that is amazing.
It is. I'm blessed. I'm really blessed. We have documents that actually show that my great-grandfather, Thomas John, was an escaped slave. The document shows an M for male, the age 15, and a check mark that shows that he escaped, and his older brother.
Anthony, you shared a bit about your family history, but you didn't connect it to how that helped you achieve all that you achieved and to break all these barriers when, you know, there weren't any colored people on the set, there weren't any racialized people on the set. Can you talk about that? Like, was that in the back of your head when you were auditioning?
No.
Or was this realization something that only happened maybe later on in life? Or?
No, I come from a family of, I come from a musical family.
Okay.
My grandmother, as I mentioned, was a music teacher and accomplished musician. My mother was an amateur singer who sang commercial jingles on the radio in the 1940s in Halifax. So coming from a family of music, I started off as a musical performer, as a nightclub singer, and found that it was very rough, schlepping equipment across the country, dealing with 6 crazy musicians, and decided to go into acting. And I was very fortunate because starting so early in the business and at the infancy of Canadian film industry, when they were producing films and looking for a black actor, I didn't have very much competition back then. My biggest break was being able to do an American TV series called Airwolf for 2 years, and then landing a leading role in the CBC dramatic series Street Legal, and ended up being the love interest for the white female star. And our relationship was the first interracial relationship on primetime television in an ongoing series in North America. And so there was a great responsibility on me, but also there was a great deal of luck in being able to have started my career so early. But I've been influenced by my family. My mother's cousin was Portia White, who was probably this country's most famous black classical singer. Her father, my great uncle, William Andrew White, a Baptist minister in Halifax, he was instrumental in allowing or forcing the Canadian government to let black men enlist and fight during the First World War. And to show their appreciation, the Canadian government made him a chaplain of this all-black battalion. And he thus became the only black chaplain in the entire British Armed Forces during the First World War. And reading his diary, knowing what he went through, about what these soldiers went through, inspired me to tell his story and do a film about his story. And that's what inspires me as a filmmaker, is drawing from the huge obstacles that had to be overcome by these courageous people who sacrificed so much in order to make life better for other people. It was so unselfish of them, and to have sacrificed so much. Those are the kind of stories that I wanted to tell as a filmmaker. And some of it was right in my own family.
Right in your own family. I'm enjoying this conversation a whole lot. I hope you're enjoying it at home. Just a reminder, if you do have questions, we want to hear your questions. Please type in your questions. I think you have to click the hand first, and then we will let you type your questions. So do that if you have any burning questions that you'd like to ask. I'd be happy to pose them to Nerene and Anthony. Nerene, did I read this correct? Your middle name is Grizzle, or no, it's not. No. You have a dad his name is Grizzle? I got that correct, right?
You got that correct.
Okay, so, good. Because I was reading it in preparation. he's a pretty influential Black Canadian. I don't have that wrong either,
No.
right? Tell us about that, because not many people know about Stanley Grizzle.
No, I don't talk a great deal about him. I have the utmost respect for what he achieved publicly as an activist, fighting for both human rights, civil rights, fighting for fair salaries for workers, etc. I will say that things are not always as they appear, and people are not always as they appear. And while he does have this image publicly, what he was behind closed doors was the antithesis.
Was the antithesis? Okay.
Yeah.
I did use Stanley Grizzle's voice in my film about the black soldiers in the Black Battalion.
You did.
So, yeah, he's quite an amazing individual.
He was publicly, privately, he was not. Sometimes, what is that line from Forrest Gump with the little girl whose father was so abusive? Sometimes there just aren't enough rocks to throw.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to come back to a bit about your career. I think the thing that obviously we have in common, we were both journalists, right? We are both journalists. You still consider yourself a journalist. I look at being a correspondent, a parliamentary correspondent in Ottawa right now. It's still very much a white environment. And that is, at some days, very tough. I can't imagine what it must have been like for you, you know, in the 90s, back in the day, you know, working in Calgary, working here in Ottawa, working there in Toronto, going up to the heights of, you know, national news anchoring for these national programs. What was it like? How did you, you know, keep your grace, your composure? How did you achieve so much in maybe an environment that sometimes was quite hostile and, you know? Yeah, wow. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, like Anthony, you were sort of a one of. And Anthony has no idea how much encouragement he was for me in my early career as well. To look up and see Anthony on screen was an inspiration for me to realize I'm not out here all alone when I was doing film and television, etc. But as a journalist, I do have to say that it was an era of one in, one out. And I remember at CBC there was...
so you could only have one,
you
could only have one black...
That was really the way that it was, that if there was a black person who was working there and another black person came in, it set up almost an antagonistic relationship between the two of you because there was the thinking that, well, one of us is going to go. Yeah. I mean, I remember working at CBC and Noelle Richardson had been the news anchor for midday, and then they had canceled her show and moved her to... CBC also was owner of a network that went broadcast into the United States, and they had moved her there. And I remember talking to her momentarily, and she was quite bitter about, and justifiably so, that they had moved her there, and we both knew why, and I was eventually moved to that same place, being told, well, someone like you is important to a network broadcasting in the United States. But you just sort of, you know, that keep your eye on the prize. You just sort of keep your head up and keep marching toward whatever your goal is. Yeah, as I said, that, you know, when I was at CTV Toronto, the environment was pretty polluted. There were, at the time when I was working there were three of us. One was a receptionist, Gloria, and then there was a reporter and myself. And the one reporter, Mitzi, disappeared. And I always wondered what happened to her. Wow. And when I was hosting Eye on Toronto, at one point they were looking for a new reporter for the show. And I had said, I thought Mitzi would be terrific. Yeah. And I found out later that she had applied for the job. And I had been told, oh, you know, she's not interested, she's not capable, this is not her in her bailiwick. But of course, being not capable is something that they used to like to say about us. You know, she just hasn't got it. I heard the same thing about Noelle Richardson at CBC. You know, we tried to turn her into a serious journalist, but she just didn't have it. And she was a tremendous talent. So you just realized that there are others who have gone before me who have put up with more than I'm having to tolerate. And I can tolerate this. I do have the chutzpah to do this. And I'm doing this for not just myself, I'm doing this for those who will come behind me.
Nerene, you were always an inspiration for me too, because when I used to see you on television, it gave me a great sense of pride to see someone who looked like me, who was doing something and doing it so well. Because when our people get a chance to get a high position or a popular position, you want them to do it well, because they're representing their community.
Yeah.
And you were so good at what you did, it made me proud to even know you.
Oh, thank you. Well, I felt the same about you. What was important seeing you was you weren't in a stereotypical role. The character that you played on Street Legal and on the other show that you did in the States,
Airwolf.
on Airwolf, you were a dignified, competent, empathetic actor. And you were an individual. You weren't lumped together as another black man. You were Anthony Sherwood in this role. And to see that stepping outside of the stereotypes that both of us grew up with was really, really encouraging.
Well, I don't know how you felt, but I always felt that, that so many people were depending upon me. Yeah. Your family, your friends, your community. You didn't want to let them down, You wanted to be your best at what you did. And I guess you must feel the same way, too.
Yeah, and there were people who believed in you. When I worked with some wonderfully encouraging people like Clive Vanderberg, who was the executive producer of today's special, who, when he was casting for Jodie, told me later, he didn't do a casting call. He just knew that when he saw the person who should be Jodie, that would be her, and the decision would be made. And he was invited to watch me. I was doing a polka dot door, and the director, Susan Murgatroyd, had said to him, "You should come and see this woman." He came out and saw me, and subsequently I was offered the role of Jodie. Not because I was black. He told me later that he had no idea that my being black would be such an advantage when they went to sell the show to the States, because the show was #2 on Nickelodeon for years and years and years. So people like Clive Vanderberg, people like Robert Gardner, who hired me back in the 80s. The government wanted to do a whole series of commercials called Fitness Ontario, and they were all different sports. And he hired me to star in all of these commercials. People like Lionel Lum, who saw me as Jodie on today's special and said, "You have such a recognition by families, such an association with families. Would you come to Ottawa and begin your broadcasting career and be our community reporter?" So there are these people along the way who really keep that spark lit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I was really struck, Nerene, when you said that one out comment, that it could only be one black person, and how that you're dealing with this hostile environment of racism, and that's very white, but you're also dealing with this environment where it seemed as if maybe they wanted to pit racialized and black people against each other. Can we talk about maybe how you all fought against that? How perhaps you created community and camaraderie among the few people who were racialized and black within the industry? Did that happen? Did you all form associations? Did you write letters to each other? Because there was no email back in those days. There's no
Way
social
back
media.
then, right? Way back before email.
Did you create a sense of community that, this is a system that can be very brutal, but it won't break us, and we're gonna band together and make sure it doesn't?
Well, I want to hear from Nerene, but for me personally, it's a very tight community, black artists and black actors and black filmmakers.
And this was in Toronto, Montreal?
In Toronto.
In Toronto, okay.
And in Montreal.
And in Montreal.
Because
okay.
when I formed that organization in Montreal to lobby the advertising industry and the television industry to include visible minorities in their television commercials, we were a group of black artists from different disciplines, dancers, models, actors, and we were very close. And we supported each other. And you have to support each other. You know, if you're going to be backstabbing each other, then you're not going to get anywhere. So, and because the industry was in its infancy and we knew there were limited opportunities, we had to support each other. And if somebody was doing a play, we would go and support that play and go see them,
Yes.
with our friends. And that's the way it was in our industry. I don't know how it was, Nerene, with you.
And there was also the motivation of those who were watching you, getting the feedback from that. When I was doing today's special, I had no idea at the time how important that show would be. That would be the most important work that I would do. And to be constantly told by viewers how much someone like you, for their children to see someone like you, the character Jody, who was empathetic, she was smart, she was capable, she was talented, for their children to see that individual was so motivating for those children. I remember once we were signing albums. We recorded an album of today's special's greatest hits. And we were signing albums at a table, and a woman came up with her little girl, and the woman was brown. And she took my hand, and she put something in my hand, and when I looked at it, it was this gold ring that I wear. She said, "The character of Jody, you being Jody, has been so important for my daughter to see, to inspire her to see what she can be. That her grandmother passed away recently, and this was her grandmother's ring, and we want you to have this to say thank you to you because we're so grateful." So when you get that kind of feedback as well,
Yeah.
it helps you to keep on going, realizing that it is important. You know, somewhere, somehow, someone sees that what I'm doing matters. And if it's just one person, like that little girl.
Wow, that's so rewarding, that story. And I see her getting emotional as she tells the story, and because it means so much to us. When I produced the film Honor Before Glory about the black soldiers, I went through hell trying to get this film produced because nobody wanted this story to come out because it reflected a bad part of Canadian history of how they treated these black soldiers. So I went through hell trying to get this film done. Finally got it made. The film won a few awards, but the biggest reward for me is not all the awards that the film won, is when I show the film, take it across Canada, and after showing the film, inevitably somebody comes up to me, a black person, and says, "You know, I saw my grandfather in the film. I didn't even know he was a part of that battalion." Or I go to another city and somebody says, "I saw my uncle in the film. I had no idea he was part of this battalion." And so the film was bringing stories and personal history to certain people. And that was the biggest reward for me. Yeah. Not the awards it won, but it was ability to touch people's lives. And that's the biggest reward a filmmaker could have.
I think just in doing some preparation, it also touched the lives of people internationally. There was a young man in France that...
Yes. I mean,
tell us about that.
Because the soldiers went over in France and served in France, you know, some of them had relationships with the French women, and there was a grandson who was a product of an interracial relationship between a black Canadian soldier and his grandmother, and he wanted to find out who his grandfather was. And so they reached out to me from France. I don't know how they got my contact information, but wanted me to help them. But I mean, the film has been shown all across Europe and North America, but its ability to touch people's lives and let people know that, you know, this story was an international story because it touched so many people in the United States because there were American soldiers who were part of it, Canadian, Caribbean men who were part of it from the Caribbean and serving in France, you know, and I had the privilege of being invited by the government of France to go to France in 2018 to see the unveiling of a monument to these Black Canadian soldiers. So actually to go over to France and walk on the same ground as my great uncle and these Black soldiers was an emotional journey for me, to be able to relive some of the moments that they experienced in France. And that's the biggest reward for a filmmaker, is to be able to go to where the thing actually happened, to really touch the ground or see the people that it affected. That's some of the biggest rewards.
Okay.
When I think back to the lawsuit that lasted 5 years, was I angry? You bet I was angry. Was I frustrated? Was I disappointed? Did I have all of those emotions because I didn't get to win that election and it wasn't fair and I didn't get to be an MPP, and I could have just harbored all of that. But after the lawsuit was over, I thought, now what do you do? And I stopped and I thought, and I realized it was ignorance. A lot of it was ignorance on the part of the reporter, who, by the way, happened to have a master's degree in American history. So he certainly, I think he knew what he was writing. So the work I'm doing now, we work with the schools, and we go into the schools, into classrooms, and we do a 1-hour presentation, and it might be on the very first Black in Canada, in North America, who died in World War I, who was just a boy of 16 years old. Or it might be on the first Black in Canada to become a pilot, and we do an interactive presentation with the kids. And there's a church in Hamilton, Stewart Memorial, which was the original church, was built by slaves. And then the next step is we take them there for a field trip, and we have centers set up, 6 to 8 centers, and each one has a different theme, is a different story, and they're activity centers where the kids do an activity. So it might have been on a protest that Blacks had to get somebody who had been jailed unfairly, and we'll ask them to make protest signs. If you were there with popsicle sticks and cutouts of paper, what would be on the sign that you hold up? I do work on building belonging with organizations and corporations to help them to embed in their strategic plan their diversity, equity, and inclusion goals, and to help inspire them to understand how important it is for everyone in their organization, not just to have a voice, but to have an equal voice. So you can take something that was a negative, as you said, putting up with some of the racism and the bigotry and discrimination that we've tolerated, and turning it into something like Anthony is doing, telling the stories, saying, wait a minute, learn who we are.
A result of, and I talk a lot about my film, Honor Before Glory, about the Black soldiers, because it was a personal story. It was based on the diary of my great uncle, who was the chaplain of the battalion. But last year, July of last year, the government of Canada decided to make a formal apology to the descendants of the Black soldiers of the No. 2 Construction Battalion. And I was asked to be the MC of that event. And it was the first apology given by the federal government to the Black community of Canada. So it shows you that one little film can start a little fire that will lead to something bigger and bigger. And it's something that is bigger than you who started the project, because there's something that's important behind it. Like you were saying about doing those shows on television, and now continuing the educational component and going out and making sure that these students learn about and partaking your knowledge onto them. This is what is needed, and this is what people in our community, the artists, politicians, and so on, have to do as a task, is allowing the community to know who we are as a people, what our history is, and how you can learn from us.
Yeah, and it's so interesting how many parallels there are in our history with others. Going out to the schools and telling them a story about my great-grandfather who fled when he was 15 and left his mom and his sisters behind, didn't know if he'd ever see them again, with just the clothes on his back, fleeing to some place that he'd never, ever been. And afterward, having students come up, and I'll never forget, like one girl who came up after and she said, I'm Palestinian. My family had to leave everything that they had behind to come here seeking a better life. So my story is very much like your story.
100%, 100%.
Yeah, doing a tour at Stewart Memorial Church, taking a group through the church. When they arrived, two of the women who were bringing this group for this tour, because I do a historical tour there, in tears, because I was Jody. And this is a woman who's probably in her 40s, who's just remembering how much that meant to her when she was a little girl. Having people come up to you who are in their 40s saying, you know, my family, we were going through an upheaval at the time, and you did a show on moving, and that really helped. It brought me comfort. Or my grandmother passed away, and you did the show on death, where Muffy had the butterfly that died, and it helped me to understand death, the sort of the finality, but the moving on from that. So, you know, you have no idea, and as you said, how important it is to tell our stories, because there's such a connectedness with others out there.
Absolutely. You know, it's for us in the media, you know, whether it's journalism, whether it's acting, whether it's whatever, we play a very large role. It's not just the roles that we're playing on television or the script that we're reading or the new story that we're writing. We're really changing the way that people think about things, and we play a really important role, and it lives on long before our roles are finished.
Well, you talked about politics, about your environment and how white it is, but you're changing it. You're one person.
It doesn't seem
you're
like that.
changing it.
I'll be honest.
You are.
Yeah.
Yes, but listening to you, yes, I can see. You know, you might not see the change immediately, but. Yeah.
I remember Tracy
Years
Moore
down
was
the line.
working at CBC when I was there, and we were in the kitchen just getting a coffee, and she said, and she was working as a reporter at the time, and she said, you know, I watched Eye on Toronto, and I really admired that show and the work that you did, and one day I want to have a show like that. And now she has City Line.
She does, yeah.
Yeah, that makes me feel good.
Yes, yes. Okay, I want to talk about your activism. We kind of touched on that a bit. Did we touch on that? Or do we? Is there more to say about that? Because it wasn't just about you all, you know, auditioning and getting roles and furthering your own careers. It was also about changing the system, changing the way the media landscape worked for Black people and racialized people.
Well, Anthony certainly did that.
Yes, Anthony, do you want to?
Well, I mentioned before that in the 70s, when I was confronted by casting directors in doing auditioning for television commercials, that they didn't want any blacks or visible minorities in the commercials, and I never decided I wanted to become a social activist. The system forced me to become a social activist. I just wanted to be an actor.
But
I just wanted to act. But the system, the way it was being run with the racism, forced me to be a social activist, to want to change it. And that's what I had to do in order to further my career and the career of my counterparts.
Can I just give you a bit more credit? I don't think not everyone responds to the system in that way. Some people just say, you know what, I will just go along with the system and see whatever I can get that benefits
like Nerene
me.
said,
you took risks.
Because it was from the family that I came from. From the examples that were set by my mother and my grandmother. That was instilled with you, and you carry with it. You know, I was asked to be on the National Apology Advisory Committee for the federal apology to the Black soldiers of number 2. And that was a form of activism, because I wanted to be a part of this committee, to want to allow the federal government to make an important apology to these Black men who sacrificed their lives. They were treated as third-class citizens, but they wanted to fight for their country and were willing to die for their country. And they were treated so terribly when they were serving in France. And so it was important for me to be a part of that committee, to force the federal government to make a formal apology. And those two instances in the 1970s and now, as recent as last year, the federal apology, those are the really two biggest forms of activism that I've been a part of. But I've been active within the union, the Actors Union, ACTRA, to promote or protect visible minority performers' rights and allowing greater representations of visible minorities, because I see it as a responsibility as a visible minority performer to fight for the rights of the other artists.
Nerene, I guess what do you say to people? I mean, we hear it especially in journalism. Your role is not to be an activist. It is just to give us the facts. But you even hear that in acting and in music and even in sports, where people get pissed off when, Colin Kaepernick takes a knee, or some artist wades into some sort of political conversation. They would say, that's not your lane. What do you think? Do you think that this is the lane of artists and performers, that this is part of the job? It's not just reading the lines, it's changing society.
Yeah, everyone is not comfortable. It's not a comfortable stance to take, but it needs to come from an informed and educated place. It can't just be paying lip service. It can't just be hollering for hollering's sake. It needs to be purposeful. But do I believe that artists, athletes, actors, teachers, journalists, everybody has an obligation, if you see wrong happening, to speak up? If you're unhappy with it, what are you going to do about it? Leave it to the next guy?
Well,
it's each of our responsibilities.
A lot of people do that. They just say, that's not my role. I'll just kind of look somewhere else. But you're saying that, it is our responsibility.
We each have a responsibility to contribute, to make a better society, to set an example for the little ones that are coming along behind us.
Okay. I think we have our first question. Thank you for the question. Who were your role models growing up? Who did you look up to in the TV industry? Whose story did you draw on in your lowest moments that kept you going? Thank you for that question. That's a really good question. Nerene, how about yourself?
I think Anthony and I have both said that we certainly draw on those that went before us, realizing that what they tolerated, what they were given, was a plate far less attractive than what has been handed to us. And so certainly at our lowest moments, for me, and I expect Anthony is similar, that you pull from them and realize, as I said, that's what's coursing through my veins is the blood of those who went before. And if they can tolerate what they tolerated, I can certainly deal with any problems that are handed to me. Growing up, it was interesting. We didn't have, when I was a little girl, there weren't people that looked like me, very many of them on television. If they did, they were probably singers like Diane Carroll, singers or dancers. But when I watched children's television, most of the images that I saw were derogatory. They made fun of my African ancestry. I grew up in an era of, Aunt Jemima pancakes and pickaninny gum, which was certainly fodder for the kids on the schoolyard to make fun of you. So my big influence was my mother and my grandmother when I looked to them. And they taught me about dignity, about pride. My grandmother used to say, you come into this world with your pride and your dignity and your grace intact, and you should leave this world with those three things unless you choose to give them away along the way.
Growing up, my role model, one of them was Sidney Poitier, just because he was such a terrific actor, the way he carried himself with such professionalism and such dignity. And when I had the opportunity to do a film with him in 2000, I was worried about meeting him because I had met so many Hollywood actors before that, and they burst my bubble and my impression of them. But he was such a gentleman. He was so kind, and to hear his stories about when he was working, first starting in the business, he said the only other black person on set was the shoe shine boy. I mean, and to hear what he had to go through, he was somebody that I admired, and I cherished that I had the opportunity to work with him and to meet him. He certainly was one of my role models.
Did you look stateside, Nerene? Like, did you say, well, maybe there weren't people like me in Canada? Did you look to the U.S. and say, well, you know, did you take inspiration there?
I did, probably as most actors, look south of the border and thought, you know, wow, if I was down there, there'd be a lot more work. What was interesting was I did go to New York, and I did spend time in Los Angeles, and when I was in those places and the word got out in Canada that Nerene's in New York, all of a sudden everybody wanted to cast you.
They were worried they were going to lose you.
Yeah, so all of a sudden there was all this work.
Well, you knew your place and you got up and you left, right? So,
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. We have another question. Thank you so much for that again. Who would you have, I can't read, who would you have liked to have worked with but didn't get a chance or have the chance to work with?
I would have liked to work with Nerene Virgin.
Yeah, we never had the opportunity to work together.
Did we host something together?
We hosted the Black Business and Professional Associations Award Dinner together.
Yes, we
Yes.
did, and we did a damn good job.
We sure did. We cleaned up.
Okay. All right, we have another question here. What life goal do you hold that you haven't achieved up to now? So what's a goal that you have that you're still working towards, or, you know, is in the back of your head, or something that you want to achieve because you've achieved a lot, you've achieved so much. Is there anything else that you still want to do?
You know, the work that I'm doing with the schools, with teachers, the work that I'm doing with organizations and companies on building belonging is a work in progress. So to continue to do that work and see those messages actually come to fruition is a goal that certainly has not been achieved across the board.
Okay.
I've had a very blessed life and career. I've traveled around the world doing documentaries in Africa and all across Canada, telling stories of the Black experience in North America, the African diaspora experience on the continent. I'm always looking for the next story that's going to move me or motivate me. And I can't say that, you know, if I was to be perished or to die tomorrow, I would have been very happy about the life I've led and the things I was able to do, and been blessed to have been able to do. So, but I'm always looking for that next story, that next project that's going to inspire me.
Okay.
I do a lot of work with Stewart Memorial Church, the church I mentioned that was the original church was built by slaves, and the church struggles. I have
This is in
Hamilton, yeah.
Hamilton, okay.
I've been blessed to write grant applications for them, and I've written 3 for them and gotten all 3 grants for them. But it's a church that struggles. It, you know, we go from hand to mouth. And I wish, my goal would be to see that church be able to stand on its own, for this country to appreciate the richness and the value in that church. It's been deemed an Ontario historical site. But that's a goal that I have not yet achieved, is to be able to inspire that kind of financial independence for that church, and the respect that places like Stewart Memorial should be garnering from this country.
It sounds like, if I could kind of put words in your mouth, like you both have this dream that has not been achieved of making sure that Black history has its rightful place in our societies, in our media? Is that maybe the answer to that question? Like, is that making sure? I mean,
We're sitting here in the Canadian Museum of History, and it's such a great venue to talk about not only our careers, but the things that have affected our careers, is our culture and our history and our own family history. I think our own family history has also been an inspiration to us as well. And I think that is so important in terms of who we are, being able to tell our history, or share our history in whatever form it is, whether it be a book, whether it be a film, but being able to share history. And as Nerene said, we are connected in so many different ways with other people. In terms of their own history, and I'm hoping that, young people, when they hear our stories, it'll motivate them to look into their own family history, regardless of where you come from, of what your grandparents went through to come to this country. That's what I hope.
Yeah, I often say when I'm in the classrooms working with kids, I'll say to them, you have no idea where you're going to be 5 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now. If you keep a diary or you journal, you're keeping track of history. And that will be so important down the road, possibly to subsequent generations, that you have no idea what you are documenting on a day-to-day basis. And that's not just for Black children, that's for all children and adults.
Okay.
That's going to be your history.
Clearly, you're a journaler. You keep a journal. Okay. I always admire people who do that. It's a good habit.
I wish I had started years and years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Okay, we have another question. These are great questions, so thank you for them. What is your favorite television program on TV now, and why? Who wants to take this?
Oh, gosh. I just binge watched Queen Charlotte and thought,
You did?
yeah.
I know nothing about this, so you have to tell us about it.
It's sort of the
give it
follow-up
away.
to Bridgerton.
Oh, okay.
And what was wonderful about it was how fictitious it was. Don't I wish that Blacks had had that kind of a presence among royalty?
It's very fictitious.
Yeah, yeah.
Would you recommend it?
For pure entertainment.
Okay, for pure entertainment. Okay. Escapism.
I don't really have a favorite. I don't watch too much television. I actually
you're reading. Or...
I actually did an episode of a series. It was an anthology series that was on Fox Network called Accused, and the stories were so. It was taken from a British series, and they revamped it. And but the stories were based on somebody who was either wrongfully or rightfully accused, and it's flashbacks, and you sort of guess if they were guilty or not guilty of the crime they committed. And it was so well written, and the actors, they had different actors every week, and it was so well acted and so well written, it became one of my favorite series to watch.
Mm-hmm. Can you point to any, and maybe if feel free to go into outside of Canada, but do you see any shows on shows on Canadian television that are doing a good job depicting the Black experience? Like, I don't know if anyone saw The Porter or anything like that, or what can you point to, or that's happening right now recently that is doing a good job talking about this history?
Did you see The Porter?
I saw episodes of it, yes.
I thought it was extremely well done.
Yeah.
The production values were 100%. And it was an all-black production. Mm-hmm. The writer's room was all black. And it showed what we can do as a community, as a culture, when we tell our own stories and produce our own stories. Because it was predominantly a black production, and one of the first ever done in this country TV series, where writers, director, producers were black, and it was extremely well done.
Yeah, and it was not renewed. So, anyways. Okay, we have another question. What do you see as your next hurdle for representation and inclusion? I really like this question. What's the next hurdle when it comes to this fight that you all have been fighting for decades?
But there's been that hurdle that's been in place for eons and continues to be. As we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, there's always that hurdle of tokenism. That rather than recognizing that that people of different ethnicities, different backgrounds, different colors, different cultures are brought into an organization because they contribute, because they are valuable, because they're competent. This DEI movement has once again shone that spotlight on tokenism. That, we're bringing in people of color because we have to. This person got brought in because we had to have one of them. And that we're taking somebody else's place who would have been more deserving. That's a hurdle that has been there and continues to be quite
and I even look at, that's an excellent point, Nerene. I look at it at an international level in terms of hurdle of inclusion. You look what's happening in the United States in terms of politics, and that right-wing extremism is being infected to all parts of different countries around the world. So I see that as a dangerous direction that the world is going through, and it's going to affect everybody who is not considered to be in the right, included in those, and their thinking of their politics. And I think it's a dangerous direction that the world is going to. That's going to affect all different types of people of color, or sexual persuasion, or whatever. It's going to affect all those groups who have been marginalized, and then will continue to be marginalized.
Do you think, in some sense, and Nerene, you could probably speak to this with the work that you're doing in DEI, do you think in some sense we're protected from that in Canada, or that we're immune from it? Anthony, you're laughing, so I guess not.
We're certainly not immune.
No? Okay.
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
It's we sort of put blinders on when it comes to, many people do in Canada, to discrimination, to bigotry, to racism, and like to point south of the border and say, it's not us, but look at them. Look at the problems they have. Look at what happened to George Floyd. Look at them. They had slaves. And
so
that speaks to a lack of education, a lack of information, because we had them too. And we do have bigotry here. We have racism, all of that. Yeah. What we see south of the border exists north of that border as well.
Absolutely. Okay. This is a hard switch. What do you think about children's TV programs that are aired currently?
It's very different than the Today's Special days. I mean, Today's Special was, I think, 28 minutes long, and it had segments in it, but it was a continuum of 4 characters. What I see now are a lot of children's programs that are 5 minutes, which maybe speaks to what we think is the attention span of a child, or does that exacerbate the short attention span of a child by making the assumption that they can only watch something for 5 minutes. Back, like in the 1980s, before 1980, there was federal monies available to support quality children's programming, and those funds are no longer there. And so we're seeing a lot of programs being brought from the States. A lot of the programs our kids see are American, a lot of Japanese animation, and a lot of animation being done here. As opposed to real people. And I wonder when it comes particularly to differences, as I said, in ethnicity, culture, ability, all of those things, whether an animated figure has the same impact on a child as a real person. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know that, they've done a study at OISE. Dr. Lee, who's a professor at OISE, is part of a global study where they've been looking at children, and they have learned that children before they're 1 year old have decided preferences, decided prejudices when it comes to skin color and having a preference for somebody that looks like them. And that by the time a child is 5 or 6 years of age, those preferences are quite firmly entrenched, unless we've made a point of exposing that child to people that are different, people who look different than they look, different colors, different abilities, that unless they see that on a regular basis and interact with that and are exposed, they develop these prejudices. So when I look at children's television today and I think I see so much animation, it's different than seeing a real person, and seeing a real person who's an individual, not lumped together in a group, but an individual.
So I guess given that so much is at stake here, like you cited a study there that just blew my mind.
It's a global study, yeah.
Like, what should be the next steps that we should take? Like, all of us have either kids or family members or young people in our life that are living with their iPads and they're glued to watching these animations and stuff like that, but it has such a great impact on their lives. So what do you think should be the next step, either from the public broadcaster or the government or, other creatives?
There's so many sources of children's television. I mean, so much of what children are watching now is they're streaming it. They're watching it on YouTube. They're sitting and watching it on iPads. I think it's value. If we're really serious about diversity, about encouraging diversity, honestly creating an equitable playing field, if we're really serious about absolute inclusion, then it has to come partially from the government. There needs to be funding available. It's expensive to produce good children's television programming. TV Ontario is in a bit of a state because there's been so many cuts in terms of their funding, and we've become a society that's dependent on the kindness of others. These public fundraisings. So I think part of it has to come from government if we're serious about it.
This is fascinating. We could spend a long time talking about this, and I haven't heard this conversation being had. But no, thank you for that. Thank you for that question. Okay, we have another question. What advice would you give to young people who would like to work in creative fields in Canada?
Well, first of all, get all the proper training that you need and required to pursue whatever creative field that you choose. If you wanted to be an electrician or a brain surgeon, you wouldn't just go into that profession without getting the proper training. And the arts is the same thing. You need to go to the proper schooling, get the proper education, so you have a complete understanding and appreciation of the art form. And study other people's works, whatever it is that you may go. If you want to be a dancer, study other dancers and choreographers and their work. If you want to be a visual artist, the same thing. Study other painters and artists to see what influences you and what inspires you, so that and try to maintain an individuality to your work, whatever it is, because that'll separate you from the rest of the pack as well.
We're in an era of TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, and everybody thinking they'll get discovered. If I sing a song or I do a dance, I'm going to get discovered and be famous. And also think about why you want to do this.
Yeah.
Percy Rodriguez was a real influence for me. He was one of the first actors I worked with in my career. And he asked me when we were working together, why did I want to do this? And he said, you need to think about the means and the end. If this is a means for you to get to an end, what is that end going to be? Because if it's just about wanting to hear applause and have fame and accolades, that's all transient. So you need to think very seriously about what is your end goal and make sure you keep that in focus.
So when you heard that, how did that translate into your life? I feel like I'm putting you on the spot all the time. I apologize, but like when you heard that advice, how did you translate that to your life?
For one thing, it's made it easier for me to make the transition for not being in the public spotlight, because that's not why I did it. I mean, you see people on a regular basis who you think, you know what, you should have stepped out long ago. But who are doing it simply because that's the only thing they know. They did it for the fame. They did it for the applause. They did it so that everybody would admire them.
Yeah.
And now they're, 80 years old, and their career has long since passed by, but they're still out there, still waiting for the applause, waiting for doing an encore. For me, I thought long and hard about it, and it's been about making whatever contribution I can on my part to better this world. If I don't like what happened, then what am I going to do about it? And to want to pass on whatever values, whatever positive instincts they've given me to my children, and to raise a happy, successful, not in the monetary sense, family, and to have positive relationships with my friends and with my family, and to value those.
Well said.
Well said, yes.
Well said.
Absolutely. And that's some good advice. Okay, we have another question from the audience. On what TV or film projects, or it could be outside the media too, right, are you currently working on?
Well, I can't be specific because they're still in the works, but I'm currently producing and directing 2 documentary films about 2 specific Black communities in Canada, which I had no idea about, and I consider myself fairly knowledgeable about African Canadian history. And this is the great thing about our history, and my job as a filmmaker is discovering these diamonds in the rough, these
Gems.
little stories that nobody knew about, and wanting to tell those stories. So I'm working on 2 documentary films about 2 different Canadian cities that have a specific story to tell about their Black community. And I love what I do because I meet interesting people who have these amazing stories to tell. And you learn so much about people when you hear these stories. And I hope I do justice to them.
You were saying, before we came on, people keep asking you, when are you going to slow down? But clearly you're not. Nerene, when are you going to slow down? Clearly you're not either.
There's so much to do. And everything you do seems to open the door to something else that you could do. Mm-hmm. I was privileged to work with this museum on Pepinot to PAW Patrol, which is the exhibition that they're showing right now, and it's on the history of children's television in Canada. So I've done that. I'm now working with the Dundas Museum and Archives on an exhibition, a virtual exhibition featuring Blacks in Dundas, because most people think that Black people didn't live in Dundas. So I'm working on that, and I'm continuing to do my building belonging work and continuing to work with schools, and just got another grant, I can't name where it came from, that will open the door to now starting to bring in co-op high school students to help us document all of the history, the photos, and all of the information that the church has collected over the years, and get it all up on a website.
Okay.
I'm also writing a new musical play in my spare time.
Okay.
About a great Canadian story. It's a story that I actually hosted in this very museum maybe 25 years ago, and decided to tell this story in a musical play form. So,
Okay.
in my spare time.
In your spare time. I'm writing my autobiography in my spare time.
Wow.
Yeah, but I'm poking along at it.
Nerene Virgin, Anthony Sherwood, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation. I really didn't have to do much because you all are just wells of knowledge, have a lot to say, a lot of good things to say. And so I just want to thank you so much for sharing that knowledge with us, for your life's work, your careers, which, I mean, your legacy, clearly you're seeing it. It's in me and it's in so many other racialized and Black people and personalities in the media, behind the scenes and in front of the camera. So thank you.
Thank you, David, for the great job you did.
Thank you, David, and thank you to the museum for inviting us.
Yes.
Absolutely. We just want to thank the museum, especially Katie Dade, one of the learning specialists who was the brains behind all of this. So thank you, Katie, and to the whole team who helped put this together. And thank you, the audience, for joining us and for those wonderful questions. We'll see you next time.
I hope you enjoyed this latest installment in our series, An Evening With. My sincere thanks to Anthony Sherwood, Nerene Virgin, and David Thurton for tonight's open and entertaining discussion, and to our sponsor, TD Bank Group. And thanks to you, our viewers, for joining us this evening. I look forward to welcoming you to the museum to see our exhibition, From Pepinot to PAW Patrol, Television of Our Childhoods, which is on view until September 1st. I also hope to see you at our next event. Good night.